What is the nicest thing a police officer has done for you? I ran a rental car off the road in Iceland. Some quad bikers called the rescue squad. Not sure what the official term is. Basically a volunteer crew that go around helping out stranded tourists. But first a cop arrived, hopped out of his car, and in flawless English said, "Oh man, you fucked up." We chatted for a bit. Then the rescue squad arrived with a winch the size of a crane and pulled my little micro out of the ditch. No official report, no ID showing, no signing anything. Just a no questions asked rescue. Returned the car the next day and got my full deposit back. So there was obviously no behind the scenes reporting. They just helped me out and went about their day and forgot about me.
That sounds pretty wild. It's cool how everyone just stepped in to help without making a big deal out of it. I guess things can be pretty laid back in some places. Getting your full deposit back was a nice surprise too. I mean, getting stuck is usually a hassle, but it seems like you got lucky with that rescue squad. Just a good example of people stepping up when they see someone in a tough spot.
I was 6 and noticed the neighbor's mailbox hanging open and a bunch of their mail in a deep ditch across the street. I told my mom. She called the police, and when the officer came out, she had me show him what I found. He listened patiently as I told him the story. I got really bold about what I believed happened. I had this theory about the bad guys, and where I thought their fingerprints were in the mud, etc. He was so sweet, seemed to write down what I said for his report, thank me, and walk me back to my house. I felt so brave and so important when he was probably doing all he could not to laugh out loud at my stupid theories. The neighbors bought me thank you flowers when they got home from vacation. It was a proud moment. I never forgot his kindness.
That's a nice story. It's cool how you felt important at that age, thinking you helped solve something big. It's funny how kids' minds work, coming up with theories that seem so serious. The cop being nice about it probably made it all feel more real for you. Those flowers were a sweet touch too. It's moments like that that stick with you. Makes you appreciate kindness from others.
I took an SAT prep class that my school district offered last summer. It was from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., and I neglected to bring any food, so I was starving. I was waiting for my ride, and the school cop was sitting in the cafeteria with me. I forget why, but he offered me some donuts that he had lying around in his car. Now, normally I would politely decline, but I was ravenous, so I said yes. We shared mini donuts and talked for like an hour. Sometimes I'm still embarrassed for asking for food from a cop, but it was still really nice of him.
That's a pretty unique situation. It's not every day you share donuts with a cop. It sounds like you were in a bind, but it worked out. That moment probably made the prep class a bit more memorable. It's cool how simple acts of kindness can turn a tough day around. I get the embarrassment, but sometimes you just gotta take what you can get.
Got picked up going 25 miles per hour over the limit in Chicago. I was on my way to college in Minnesota, and I was still 500 miles away. The police officer asked where I was going, and I told him I was headed to school. He asked where school was and what I was going to school for. I told him I want to be a teacher. He took my license and registration, came back a few minutes later with only a warning and one piece of advice. Next time someone asks you what you're going to school for, don't say, "I want to be a teacher." Say, "I'm going to be a teacher." And then he walked away. Never drove that fast through Chicago again, and I took his advice to heart.
That's a pretty interesting encounter. It's always a mix of nerves and relief when you get pulled over like that. The advice from the officer makes sense. A little confidence goes a long way. I guess it's a reminder to be mindful on the road, too. Learning from experiences like that helps shape how you approach things in the future. Glad you took it to heart and changed your driving habits.
When I was 6, my parents got me a puppy. The first thing I wanted to do with the little guy was walk him down to the park and play in the grass. On our journey down the street, a patrol car pulled up next to me and asked where we were going. I grinned ear to ear and told him I was taking my puppy for a walk. and we were going to play in the park. He proceeded to slowly follow us down there in his cruiser and waited at the park the entire time we played. On our way back, he said that I had a cute puppy and to watch for cars. Then he drove off.
That's a nice memory. Being that young and excited about a puppy is pretty relatable. The cop following you just to make sure you were safe adds a unique touch to the story. It shows how small moments can leave a lasting impression, and it must have felt pretty special having a police officer watching out for you. Just a simple day in the park, but it sounds like a good one.
Was traveling in San Francisco with friends, decided to walk across the Golden Gate Bridge. Got to the lookout on the other side, extremely cold. That bridge is windy as fuck. We were used to heat wave/Texas temperatures and not expecting California mildness, and tired. Began the long walk back across and ran into a policeman in a little buggy. Can't find a pic, but literally this tiny van with bars separating the back from the driver, who offered to give us a lift back across. We happily piled into the back of this funny little vehicle, and he chatted to us the whole way back, telling us the best places to visit in the city, listening to our travel stories, generally being really sweet. Turns out he was on suicide watch and just patrolled the bridge up and down all day long.
That's an interesting story. It's cool how some random encounters can make a trip memorable. The weather must have been a shock, especially coming from Texas. Getting a ride with a cop in that little buggy sounds amusing. It's nice he took the time to chat and share recommendations. It's a reminder that everyone has their own struggles, even in a role like that. Sometimes, the unexpected moments stick with you the most.
I don't know about nice, but it was pretty funny, I guess. I was driving north and had about an hour trip total. In every single town I passed through, I got pulled over because one of my headlights was out. The first cop gives me his business card thing with his name and badge number on it and send me on my way. Next town, same gig. I tell him I'm well aware that my headlight is out. I've already been stopped for it the town over and I plan to get fixed the next day. Great. Gives me his card, sends me on my way. The next town over, I get pulled over yet again. This time though, the cop comes up laughing his ass off and says he knows I've already been stopped, but he doesn't want to break the chain. So he gives me his business card as well, and then he gives me an escort to the next town, which was my destination.
That's a wild trip. Seems like you got a bit of a cop parade going. It's kind of funny how they all just kept giving you their cards. At least the last cop saw the humor in it and decided to help you out. I guess sometimes being pulled over can have its perks. You probably had a story to tell after that drive. Wouldn't have expected an escort for a headlight issue.
I was 19 and took my mom's brand new car to my girlfriend's house. She had forgotten something at my house and needed it that night for the following morning. I left my house without my wallet and just drove the mile to her. She came downstairs, took the bag from me, and went back inside. As I started to pull away, an undercover car pulled me over. 2 officers approached the car. When they asked me for my license and registration, I froze. I had nothing on me. I profusely apologized and explained the whole story. They were both very understanding. One officer even joked that, "You were putting our time in, huh?" They gave me and all visible areas of the car a once-over. When they were satisfied, they both told me to get home safely. They didn't even hint at a ticket. Turns out, there was a huge drug bust in the neighborhood a few days later. Here I was, a 19-year-old, in a brand new car, dropping off a package at midnight. I must have thrown up every red flag ever. They could have made my life difficult. They were totally understanding and cut a young kid a break.
That's a wild experience. It's kind of cool how those officers were chill about it. You were just trying to do a nice thing for your girlfriend. But yeah, I get how that could raise some eyebrows. You expect trouble in situations like that, but sometimes people surprise you. Shows there are decent folks out there, even when things get tense. It's good to know they just let you go.
Pulled behind my truck, shined his headlights, and lead me through changing my tire. On my way to work, third shift, overnight, I blew a tire. He saw my hazards pulled on a side road I pulled into and pulled in check on me. Now, I knew how to actually change a tire, but I didn't know a couple things. How do I get my spare down from under the bed? And where do I actually put the jack in order to safely lift the truck without damage? Since I actually needed to know these things, he didn't do them for me, which I appreciated, but answered my questions and showed me. He also had his blue lights on to keep traffic away. Thanks to him, I am confident in changing tires and now filled in the gaps of my knowledge.
That's a solid story. It's great when someone steps in to help without taking over completely. You learned what you needed to know and got some peace of mind for the future. Plus, having the blue lights there must have made things feel a bit safer while you were figuring it out. It's cool how people can come together in simple moments like that.
Not for me exactly, but my neighbor got her car stuck in the snow, so her husband asked my brother and I to help him push the car. Their toddler son only heard, "Mom is stuck," so he called the cops for help. They came, talked to the kid, and told him it was the right thing to do if his mom was really in trouble. Some cops would have scared kids off of calling at all or berated them for a trivial call. Then we all had a snowball fight.
That's a pretty amusing story. It's good to see the kid took action, and the cops handled it well. It's an interesting way to turn a stressful moment into something fun with the snowball fight. Kids can be persistent when they think something's wrong. Plus, it's nice to see how neighbors can come together in odd situations. Just a regular day, but it turned into a memorable one.
When I was young and dumb and going through a horrible breakup really nasty, I told my ex something like I wanted to kill myself. I was really down and out and feeling hopeless. She called the cops and they showed up at my apartment. He talked to me for a few minutes and ensured that I wasn't, in fact, suicidal. Then as the paramedics arrived, he sent them away and stayed and talked to me for a bit about love and loss and how these things pass with time and how none of it is worth being suicidal. Basically just helped me put things in perspective and left. I don't know what they're entitled to do under the law when responding to these calls. Perhaps he could have taken me in custody, I don't know. But he was a really nice guy who gave me a few minutes of his time when he very fairly could have told me to grow up and don't do shit like this that distracts them from more important things. His kindness and advice was a real turning point for me.
That sounds like a really tough time. It's good to hear that a police officer showed you kindness when you needed it. It's strange how a simple conversation can change your perspective. That guy probably didn't have to stay, but he did. It can be surprising how people can be there for you in unexpected ways, especially when things feel heavy. It helped you find a way forward, which is what matters.
Pulled a cop off my back and threatened to arrest the same cop on grounds of assault. I spent the next few years being helped by my own small-town officer nice guy. He helped me escape my family and not fall into the same life as my dad. If it weren't for him, I would have been dead or in jail a very long time ago.
That's an intense situation. It's interesting how a person can change your path. Having someone like Officer Nice Guy around must have been a game changer. It's not every day you find someone ready to help you when things get tough. That support can make a big difference in turning your life around. You're lucky to have crossed paths with him.
Back in the late 90s, I had hung out at a friend's house until like 2 a.m. I started the 5-mile walk home, and about a mile into it, heavy rain started. I didn't have an umbrella. I was soaked in seconds, and this was before cell phones, so I couldn't call for backup. I figured, hey, you can't get any more wet than this, so I just kept walking home. Another mile down the road, an officer drove past me and turned around. He asked me how much farther I had to go, and when I told him about 3 miles, he said, "Hop in," and drove me the rest of the way. I had to sit in the back since I was so wet, but I didn't care. It was awesome for him to even offer.
That's a pretty solid story. Walking in the rain without a phone really puts you in a tough spot. But it's cool how the officer came through and gave you a ride. Just shows that people can be unexpectedly helpful, even when you're in a bad situation. Getting wet sucks, but at least you had an interesting experience out of it. Life throws random stuff at you sometimes.
When I was a new driver, my truck broke down in 13-degree weather, and I was an hour from home. An officer pulled over, had me sit in his squad car to warm up, and attempted to work on my truck. When he couldn't fix my truck, he took me to the nearest gas station and dropped me off so that I would stay warm.
It's pretty crazy how sometimes you're stuck in a tough spot and someone steps in to help. This officer didn't have to go out of his way like that. It's easy to think that everyone's just doing their job, but moments like that really show the good in people. Just a simple act of kindness made a cold situation a lot better. Makes you appreciate those little things.
I was half drunkenly walking home from a party to my dorm room. A cop car was parked in an alley with two younger officers standing outside of the car as I walked by. I nodded and kept walking. The cops called out to me as I was about 20 feet away and asked if I was 21. I responded that I was, which was true. They popped the trunk and hoisted out a 30 rack with 26 beers in it. Told me some kid dropped it and ran when they were driving by, and they didn't want to have to log it. I obliged and got free beer from the trunk of a cop car in college.
That's a wild story. Cops were just trying to unload that beer, and you happened to be there. Kind of a funny situation, though. You got a free 30 rack, and they didn't want to deal with it. It's one of those college moments that just happens. You just keep walking home, and now you've got a party starter for the night. Not your usual run-in with the cops.
I was an undergrad during a winter break. I was alone and following a friend's family tradition of going to a Chinese buffet on Christmas, as my family was all out of state. My $600 car died, usually just needed to rest, fuel-related I think, and a cop comes up behind me, asks if I'm okay / what I'm doing, and invites me to his home for Christmas dinner with his family. I got back to my car a few hours later. It started, and he followed me home to make sure it didn't die again. I was very thankful. I called his local office asking for an address to send a card, and they were not surprised he would do something like that, 30 years on the force.
That's a pretty cool story. It's nice when people go out of their way to help. This cop really took time to make sure you were okay and included you in his family's plans. It's rare to see that kind of kindness, especially from someone in uniform. It seems like he really made a difference in your holiday. Glad your car worked out in the end too.
When I was 13, I was at the rec center with my friends just dicking around. An ice cream truck pulled up around the corner, so I went to go get some. As I was buying from the truck, I paid the $3 overpriced ASF for a Sonic Ice Pop with a $10, and the guy gave me back $6. I started arguing with the guy to give me back the rest of my money. A cop came by and sorted everything out. He gave the guy operating the truck a $500 fine, and he's banned from running a business in the state of Maryland. Whoever says cops don't do anything good needs to change their attitude.
That was a wild day. Just hanging out with friends, and you end up in a situation like that. It's crazy how quick things can escalate. The ice cream truck dude probably didn't expect to get fined like that. It's good the cop stepped in, though. Sometimes you see the unexpected side of things, and it makes you appreciate when help shows up. Kind of a memorable afternoon overall.
Had a cop I didn't know show up at my house. He talked to me for about 30 minutes about making better life choices. Last thing he told me was that he could see the potential I have, and he believed I was a special person. This changed my life. I was headed down the road to prison at the time. Years later, I still ended up in the SHU of a level 4 maximum security prison. I'm now a cop there. I get a little choked up every time I think about it. The guy saved my life.
It's interesting how a stranger can have a big impact. That cop just showing up and talking to you made a difference. It's wild that you went from being in a tough spot to working in a maximum security prison. It shows that change is possible, even when it feels unlikely. Those moments stick with you, and it's nice to hear that you found purpose from it. Life can be unpredictable like that.
Gave me and my drunken friends a lift home when we were hitchhiking at 3 a.m. on a quiet road when we were around 16-17s. Cops in my hometown were generally good. The ones in my new town have the highest complaints per capita in the country. Ran into them a few times, and they were complete assholes. Edit. Also, when camping, an officer, off-duty, friend of a friend, was passing around moonshine. I asked if we were ignoring all laws and pulled out my pipe. He just smiled and said, "Nice tobacco pipe," and that was that.
That sounds like quite the night. Hitchhiking at 3 a.m. is always a bit risky, but at least you got a ride home. The difference between cops in your hometown and a new one is interesting. It's funny how one off-duty officer could be so chill with the whole moonshine thing. Just goes to show there are all kinds of people in the job. Glad you had a good experience with the smoke too.
I was in a severe car accident in 1998. I had my 2 young daughters with me. I was badly hurt, but they were uninjured, just shaken up. A female police officer came and got my daughters out of the car and gave them stuffed animals to hug on. My youngest was in a car seat. They kept her in it until she could be checked over. My oldest, who was about 5, was in the front. Car seat laws were not as strict as they are now. The officer took the oldest out and just held her and calmed them both down and reassured them. She was just so gentle and kind. I will never forget her.
That sounds like a really intense moment. It's good to hear that your daughters were okay. That police officer really showed compassion by taking care of them during such a scary time. It's those little acts of kindness that leave a lasting impression. You definitely had a rough experience, but it's nice that someone stepped in to help. It must have made a difference for your daughters.
Many years ago, me and my friend were asked to take place in a police lineup, and since we had a few hours to kill and we're going to get paid the princely sum of £10 for our troubles, we thought, why not? During the process, someone asked for a drink, and we were all given a drink and a biscuit, which was nice.
Sounds like a weird day. Getting paid to just stand there is something you don't hear about often. The drink and biscuit part kind of makes it feel more casual, like an unexpected hangout. It's funny how some odd experiences stick in your mind. Just a simple moment turned into a story. Glad you got $10 out of it.
When I was 2 weeks old, I stopped breathing and turned blue. My parents called the police, this was before 911, to get an ambulance to take me to the hospital. A local policeman heard the call over his radio and luckily was in the neighborhood. He sped to my house, put my mom and I in a back seat, and raced me to the hospital in under 3 minutes. The doctors told us that he had saved my life. I had a very serious case of asthma that the doctors hadn't diagnosed yet.
That's a wild story. It's crazy to think how close that was. A cop just happening to be nearby really made a difference. It's all kind of a blur from 2 weeks old, but that moment shaped a lot. The fact that asthma went undiagnosed until then is something. It's good to know someone was there when it really mattered. Just shows how things can change in a second.
This was pre-smartphones. Got lost with a mate in the middle of a shithole of a city in buttfuck nowhere at about 1 a.m. Found a cop that was ticketing a bloke for whatever reason. Went and asked him for directions mid-ticketing. He told us to jump in his car, and we did. He not only drove us around to find a motel, but ensured the motel had reception open before letting us go. My friend left something in the cop's car and didn't realize until we were on a bus back home a few days later. We called up the cop shop in shithole city, buttfuck nowhere, and they arranged for one of their cruisers to make the 5-hour drive back to our city to drop it off to a local station that day. Cops are cool as shit.
Sounds like a wild night. Getting lost in an unfamiliar city can be pretty stressful. It's nice that you guys found such a helpful cop, though. Not a lot of people would go out of their way like that. And to return your friend's stuff after all that time is just a solid move. Shows that sometimes, even in rough places, there are decent people around.
When I was 17, a friend and I were at a mall and eating lunch. We heard announcements that an influential person had died, and there were riots in the city. The mall asked us to evacuate the premises immediately. When we stepped out, we saw a lot of panic and people running. There were already banners and people screaming slogans. We were in the center of the city. We did not have vehicles of our own and had to depend on public transport. We walked around begging drivers to give us a ride, and were in a right old panic about the situation. Nobody was giving a ride, and we were stuck in the middle of what was looking to be the center of some big trouble. A policeman came over and asked why we were on the street, and when we explained, he gave some friends a call. He stayed with us till a ride arrived and put us into it with strict instructions to the driver about the routes to take. We made it back home 3 hours later, and very safe thanks to that one man.
That day was pretty wild. Just hanging with a friend, and suddenly there's chaos outside the mall. It felt surreal seeing people running and shouting. We didn't really have a plan and nobody was stopping to help. Then this cop showed up and sorted things out for us. Just stood there, calm, until we got a ride. A simple act made a huge difference. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places.
Had a police officer pull me over for a burnout headlight. Asked me if I had been drinking. I told her that I had had a single swig about 30 minutes ago. I filled in for a friend in beer pong for a single throw. She made me take a breathalyzer test. I blew a small amount, though I had my own, so the legal limit is 0 tolerance. She called a tow truck and told me I would be getting my vehicle impounded and my license suspended. While waiting for the tow truck, she told me that because I blew so little and I'd been very respectful and cooperative, if I could have someone come and get me and drive my car back home, she would let me off with a warning. A buddy came and drove my car home. I can't think of a single other situation where a new driver had been driving with a burnout headlight and alcohol in their system, albeit a very small amount, and got a warning. It pays to be respectful to police officers.
This sounds like a rough situation. Getting pulled over for a burned headlight is annoying enough, but adding the drinking part complicates things. It's good that you were respectful. It seems like that made a difference. Most people might not get such a break in that scenario. Props to your buddy for coming to help out too. Just a reminder to keep an eye on those headlights next time.
I was in my stupid teens and walking down the street, smoking a spliff in the middle of the afternoon, Canada, 1990s. Cop approaches, I sort of awkwardly conceal spliff behind my back. Cop asks what I'm smoking. I say cig. He says it sounds nice, might be nicer if I went back home and finished smoking it there though.
That sounds like a classic teenage moment. Trying to play it cool while knowing you're not really fooling anyone. The cop seemed laid back, giving you a chance to avoid trouble. It's interesting how these little encounters stick with us over the years. Makes you think about those carefree times and the silly things we did. Just a reminder of how to navigate life, even in awkward situations.
One let me go on edit equals let me off the hook for some serious shit that could have ruined my life. Another, and this isn't me, but should be heard, happened to my mom. My brother got in a really bad accident on a motorcycle. He was 13. He was being airlifted to a nearby hospital. A local officer called my mom, raced to her job to pick her up, and then rushed her to the helicopter 120 through the suburbs to get her in the helicopter before it took it off.
That's a heavy story. Sounds like your friend really had a tough experience, and it's wild how things can change in an instant. That officer stepping in to help your mom must have meant a lot. No one expects to get that kind of news, let alone have someone go out of their way to make sure she got there in time. It's nice to know that people can still show up for each other in dire moments.
My daughter had just gotten her first big girl bike. While out on her new bike, we stopped for me to grab a morning coffee. She proudly walked in with her helmet on, and there were 2 police officers inside grabbing a coffee as well. We all left at the same time, and one of the officers said that he liked her helmet and that she was a smart kid to be so safe. She was beaming and then asked if they wanted to see her bike. They came over and for 10 minutes listened so intently to her describe every part of the bike, what she liked best about the bike, how to ride a bike, and literally every bike safety tip she'd been taught. It was the sweetest thing, and they seemed so happy to just do that for her.
That's a nice moment. Kids really can light up a room with their enthusiasm. It's cool how the officers took the time to engage with her. Those little interactions mean a lot. It probably made her day to have them listen so carefully. It's refreshing to see adults appreciating a child's excitement, especially about something as simple as a bike. Good memories like that stick with you.
I had a boyfriend break up with me at midnight when I had to work the next day, and all day at work I held it together, but on the car ride home, I burst into tears. I knew it probably wasn't safe to drive like that, so I pulled off to the side of the highway. I was bawling, so I didn't hear him come up to my door, but he tapped on my window and asked me if I was okay when I rolled it down. I told him my boyfriend had broken up with me, and he actually went to his car to get some tissue and said, "It's gonna be okay. You sit here as long as you need to and keep your head up."
That's a rough situation. Breakups are hard, especially when they catch you off guard. It's cool that a stranger stepped in to help, though. Sometimes it's the random acts of kindness that really make a difference. It's good you pulled over instead of driving in that state, too. At least you had someone there to remind you it would get better. That kind of support can mean a lot.
When I was 18, I was caught carrying a case of beer. They gave me the option of dumping it or giving it to them. Being a nice guy, I offered it to them for after their shift. They went and talked for a second, then came back and said, "Get one of your of age friends to carry it." So I got to keep my beer and I didn't have to carry it. Top notch.
That sounds like a pretty chill situation. You managed to keep the beer and didn't even have to deal with carrying it. It's nice when things work out like that. Shows there's some understanding out there too. Just a casual moment that turned into a win. I guess it pays off to be nice sometimes.
I've had a few good cop experiences, but probably the best would be when my mother got arrested when my brother and I were both in the car. The guy that took us back to the station was a really friendly guy, and he made sure we were all right and tried to keep us from being scared. I was 9 and my brother was 11, so we were pretty nervous to say the least. Once we got back, he kept us company while the police tried to contact my father or a foster home. We were literally moments away from being in a foster home. They were about to load us up in a car when our father finally answered his phone, but the police officers still managed to make sure we were okay and calm even then. Hope that dude is doing well, whatever he's doing.
That's quite the story. It must have been tough for you and your brother at that age. That officer sounds like he had a good sense of how to handle the situation. It's nice to hear about someone in that role being kind and reassuring. It really makes a difference in moments like that. You never forget those small acts of kindness. Hope you and your family are doing fine now.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.